CMMS Radio talks about all things CMMS, computerized maintenance management software, focused on maintenance management. It's the people, the process, and the culture that make your CMMS journey a success. Welcome back to CMMS Radio. Today, we're going to have a conversation with Gary Jones. He's Senior Sales Manager with Eleco Soft, incorporating PMAC and Shire system. Gary Jones, welcome to CMMS Radio, man.
Nailed it. Thank you, Greg. How are you?
Doing all right, man. It's been a long time in the making. I think you and I have been working on this for, must be a month to finally get connected and record.
Yeah, we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? Which
I
think with hindsight, we wish we'd have recorded it at the time.
I know, by the time we were done, it was like, that's exactly what it would have been like, So this is good, though. We met before virtually. We get to jump into this conversation, not so much a product-centric thing, but more about kind of your background and experiences and how they've led you to work with so many different types of people. So, like, very briefly, like, how'd you get into this industry in the first place, and how do you end up exactly where you are right now?
Well, if most people are honest, they probably say the same as me, which is by accident more than by design.
Yeah.
So I came into the industry, into this industry specifically, just through the normal sales channel. So had some experience of sales. As that developed, had an aspiration to get into kind of software and technology. And then by accident fell into what is broadly termed asset management or enterprise asset management of some description. So that's where I've been plying my trade for, God, must be 30 years. And I think I stuck with it because this sounds like a typical sales cliche, but I genuinely enjoy it. I find it interesting. I find it intriguing. I find the whole process of maintenance, asset management, and how that relates to digital maintenance and how people buy software and how they make good decisions and bad decisions and how they justify it and what goes wrong and what goes right. I find all of that fascinating. I find the kind of fallout from it probably even more fascinating than my actual job itself. That might be easy to believe, speaking as a salesperson.
Well, so when you talk about the fallout, is it kind of the ups and downs that come with it, or the kind of challenges that your clients that you get to work with experience? Because we've talked about that just a little bit. I was kind of thinking you're heading towards what they really struggle with and what challenges come up. But what do you mean by fallout?
In my role, what you often see is people reaching out, sometimes because they don't have any kind of digital maintenance or CMMS provision incumbent in the company. But more often than not, they do have something. And what I've learned over those years is they approach us because they're struggling with what they have. If you trace it back, it's this kind of repeated exercise of failure on behalf of the people selecting the right product or the right vendors. And there's loads of things associated with it. We said this last time that we spoke before a couple of weeks ago. What I often see is people using systems firmly holding the belief that what they want to achieve is unachievable with the tools that they have. And actually, sometimes, not all the time, it is achievable. But what they didn't do is implement it correctly. So they either made a mistake when they selected the product, and sometimes as well as, they didn't implement it correctly. And that's all to do with that kind of buying process. So if you think that you need some kind of CMMS provision, you need some kind of digital maintenance tool to help, that's where you would normally encounter somebody like me. And let's be honest, we don't always have the best reputation, sometimes justified, sometimes unjustified. But in all the time that I've been doing it, you see repeated patterns of the good things that people do, but also the mistakes that they make. And commonly those mistakes relate to how they go into that process. So people often buy on what they see. They don't buy based on an outcome. Yeah.
Yeah.
So to nail that, if you're engaging with multiple software vendors because you want to improve or implement some kind of CMMS provision, most people don't go through that process very often. So they can be easily led by the potential vendors into what's important. So what people should be doing is they should be going into those conversations with a really clear idea of what their requirements are. So what's important to us, what adds value, what outcome do we want? Because ultimately, once you get into the sales arena, sales, it's theatre, right? And it's easy to be led by that. And this kind of concept of shiny syndrome. So people get into the process of multiple vendors. They see something that they like the look of aesthetically, or maybe they see some small value in it from a process point of view. But what they don't really do is understand, in that scenario, in that environment, is it more important than the things that add value? And they don't know the answer to that question because they don't map it before they do it.
You know
Does
what?
that make sense?
Not only does it make sense, there's this, as you're describing it, I'm just thinking about how you said that people don't necessarily do this that often, which is kind of true. I mean, there's many, many people that have, I've done this system, I've done that system, I went to this place, got that one. We've changed systems 7 times. However, it's not a super common project. People might think that everybody's getting new CMMSs or EAMs all the time, and that's not the case. And then when they do, it might be because they've lost a champion, they've had some turnover, and now it's not necessarily like riding a bike where you can just kind of do this in a simple way. You have to have a clear objective as to why you're doing this, what you're shooting for on that outcome, what that gives you for a long range vision, I should say, with regards to the organizational improvements. But those things you call it shiny thing syndrome, where I'm providing CMMS demo and I'm showing you all this stuff, and bam, you see this dashboard and it just blows you away, and you see this other little feature that's going to be really, really useful. Well, within the next week or two, or if you move forward on that, because that's great and that's good, you do lose sight. You can easily lose sight of things. Decision making is really challenging when you're always trying to get it right. And if you're not using something like data or something to keep you focused on that outcome, you get off track very, very easily. And then people all of a sudden, wait, what are we doing again? Why did we pick this?
Yeah. People don't focus on the fundamentals. And let's
talk about that. Because you were talking about how that kind of fundamental basis really translates into how their change management process is really going to turn out.
Yeah. So what this is, again, it's people not going into the process with their eyes wide open. So if you go into a process of multiple vendors, then the salespeople, they're primed, their process is find the problem, find the pain, and then present a solution. So I could ask you what you think your problems are, but you're going to tell me the first thing that comes to your mind if you've not gone into that process, having documented not just your problem, but everybody else's. So what we commonly see is people prioritizing emotional pain over value. So if I'm talking to you and you're, I don't know, you're looking after multiple sites, or you're looking after a single site, whatever the case may be. So you might have an issue that causes you emotional pain. And what I mean by that is it gets on your nerves. It happens repeatedly. maybe every day, maybe multiple times a week, and it frustrates you and it affects you emotionally. So when you have those conversations, if you've not done the right preparation, when somebody asks you, what problem do you want to solve? Then, because it's human nature, right? We can't help it. It comes out of us. The first thing that comes to mind is that thing that's causing us the emotional pain. But actually, if you go into that process and you broaden the conversation to whoever all of the stakeholders are, and you've got to include everybody, and you've got to say, if we did this, how would it help you? What problem would it solve? And more importantly, let's quantify the value of that problem. So you might get a list back and there might be 25 things on that list. What you need to do then is quantify the value of those. So how much positive impact do they have on the business? Because you might find that the thing that isn't an emotional pain, but is more of a practical issue, that might have the most value to the business in terms of productivity or efficiency or whatever it happens to be. So then when you go into the process and you look at it, those different vendors, that's where you focus your attention, right? Not on your emotional pain, but on those 3, 4, 5 things that are going to make the difference in terms of productivity and efficiency. What's going to change the bottom line? What's going to improve percentages? What's going to please production? What's going to improve the position for finance? What's going to increase capacity for the maintenance team? Those are the things that people need to focus on. But this is going back to the start, this is the thing that I see repeatedly is people don't come into that process armed with that information. They've not done that due diligence. And I get it, right? Because that's what we said. People don't do it very often. The odd exception, you get some people that are changing consistently. But they're changing consistently because they've not done this correctly either. So in order to go into that process with your eyes wide open, if you go into that process with your eyes wide open, that's what's going to enable you to understand which direction do we need to go in, because that's where I know I'm going to get the value from.
Right.
And
it
has a knock-on effect as well, right? In that quite commonly in these situations, there'll be people that own that process, or they own that problem, or they own the possible solution, which might be the digital maintenance CMMS piece. But then there'll be other people that they need to go and sell that concept to. So if they've not gone through that process and documented those requirements correctly, then what we see is quite often is you and I might have a conversation and you might think it's a great idea because I've told you how I'm going to solve your emotional pain. But then when you go and speak to somebody else and say, I think this is a great idea, if they don't have the same emotional pain, they're going to say, well, what's the benefit? What benefits other than solving that are we going to derive from this? Because I don't experience that pain, so frankly, I don't care. So if you don't go into the process and engage everybody and get that buy-in before you go into it, not when you're in it, not at the end of it, before you go into the process, if you don't have that consensus, you're making it really difficult.
Yeah, and this is where, when you take on a project like this, on one hand, we say, well, it's pretty simple, it's pretty straightforward, but you're going to have to do this work. And sometimes we don't know how long that work's going to take to really find out, why do we really need this? How is it tied to what I do? How is it tied to what my other team members and organizational people do? And when we get to that point of making that business case to leadership, CFO, COO, on and on like this, which you probably already should have if you're on this, and you should have already had if you're on this endeavor where you're engaging on demos, maybe even on discovery calls. Because if you don't know your business and what those needs are, not just for you and your team on the shop floor or for the operators, but for the boardroom, then you're not going to get much traction. However, it feels to me like this disruption that's caused by having to identify a problem, find its root cause, and then we've decided, we know that we need to go and execute on this, get this CMMS or EAM to solve these problems. It takes us away from all of our other work. And everybody is firefighting, not just in maintenance, not just in asset management, not just in trying to focus on and deliver reliable outcomes. They're just firefighting with everything that they do otherwise. within the job, within their lives. So it's a real challenge. And I don't think we're talking about anything new. I think we just want to kind of think, what's a good strategy for clients out there when they want to try to figure this out? Where do they really start? And how on earth are they narrowing it down when it comes to all the systems out there? I hear estimates ranging anywhere from 400 to 1,000 systems globally that fit this categorization of digitized asset management, maintenance management, all of it.
The thing is, my belief is it's not as simplistic as there is a system that is better than another system. What there are systems that are better for you. And that's why it's important to do all of those things that we talk about. So people often assume that there'll be a section of the market, probably quite a large one, that will go for the cheapest. But in reality, what we see more often is people that have overbought because they didn't understand what was important. They might have followed the shiny thing syndrome, and they might have pursued things and promises and things that they thought were important or were going to add lots of value, but they've missed the things that are really important because, maintenance teams in particular, they have a finite resource. They have lots of pressure. They might have conflict with finance. They might have conflict probably more often with production. So what they need to do is my view of it is that they need to find the things that really move the dial and not overbuy. And that is more common than people that have, I don't think I could count on one hand in 30 years the amount of people that have said, we bought this system, but it's wrong because we wanted it to do more. What we always see is people that say to us, it does too much, or they might not say that, but that's ultimately what the issue has been, is they've overbought, it's complicated it, it's muddied the waters, and they've been unable to focus on the things that are really important, the core things that really add value, because they've overbought and it's complicated the problem and they don't have the resource to manage the things that they've overbought.
Yeah, I think of this idea of it's silly, man, but cars, right? People understand cars, automobiles, whatever. And we get stuff in that arena that we never ever use, right? So when we switch back to the CMMS, the maintenance management solution, your EAMs and ERPs, a lot of times when we're working with these clients, we want them to also have a forward vision as to where they could go in the long run. And that is, I think, more about selling than it is about helping. And so I'm saying when vendors are, offering you strategies that can solve your problem as a client, right? A client that needs one of these systems, and you do. They want you to buy for the long haul. They want you to be around, and I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but you end up with stuff that you're never going to use, and people will question that, and that's where it all goes off the rails. So here's what I'm thinking is it okay, in your view, when people buy these solutions to solve the problem that they have now and have a little bit less, this is a really weird question, less of a vision for the future as to how they're going to grow into a solution? I see like SMB, small and medium-sized businesses that have enterprise solutions. And for years and years and years, I've always thought, why? You just don't need it. You're not going to touch that level. And if you do, you could solve that at that time. I wonder if that's dangerous.
I think it is, because of course there's a scale in everything. There's a scale in the type of EAMs and CMMS solutions that are out there. Some are fairly simplistic and some are enterprise level, and some will have, as we do, tiers that have different levels of functionality as you go through them. And what's important at that point is identifying where you are, so not overstretching, overreaching, based on the stuff that we talked about earlier. So it's identifying where are we now. So if we look at, so there's a thing that there's a process that we go through, which we call a maintenance maturity assessment, right? So it's basically saying, okay, let's look at what you do now, and let's pin you on that curve. So let's be honest, and let's make an honest assessment of where are you, and realistically, with the resource that you have, where can you get to? And I think that's really important for our customers, and from the customer's side, when they're looking at vendors, to understand and be honest with themselves. Where are we? Where do we want to be? Because that's also a difficult conversation that we have quite often is when we go into those conversations, we want to know, where are you really? But if you ask somebody pointedly, do you have a problem with this? Do you have a problem with that? Again, going back to the human nature thing, you don't want to admit your failings or your flaws, or where you're struggling. And that's, broader than just a work conversation. That is genuine human nature.
Yeah.
But what we need from our side is, we want people to give us that honesty, because we're not judging you. What we want to do is make sure that what we're doing is appropriate and the right fit. And we want to, because that will tell us where you are now, and where you're going to be realistically in 12 months, in 3 years, in 5 years.
Well, that's the journey portion of how these conversations are supposed to go when it comes to, say, for example, discovery calls, and how you really have to get as much information as you can, but that's not about selling anything. It's really about discovery, which I think everybody would say, well, discovery sounds like a legal thing and it's a case. And, well, have you given discovery yet? Well, it's the same process. We're trying to go on this expedition with a potential client and say, one, do you have the problems I'm really good at solving that I know we solve? And two, do you really have that problem, and do you understand it, is what we should be doing, right?
Yeah.
I kind of interrupted you, but carry on.
You're right. Good discovery it's a 50-50 thing. It's not, from the vendor's side, what they shouldn't be doing is, you shouldn't feel as though they're leading you down a particular path or manipulating the conversation. It should be a meeting of solution and requirements, which is why it's so important that you know what they are. But it's a 50-50 decision at the end of that meeting, that discovery, where you as the customer can say, I think this is a good idea, or I think the conversation is worth pursuing, or it isn't. But equally, the vendor needs to also have the same honest assessment of that conversation. So if you've gone through that discovery and you've highlighted that it's not a good fit, then as a vendor, you should feel empowered and even, might sound extreme, but even morally, you should be saying at that point, I really appreciate your time. We're not a good fit for you, and these are the reasons why. They want to disagree with that, and often that happens. But actually, you might just be lacking a bit of clarity about what the requirements are. But if you don't think there's a meeting of vendor and customer at that point, that's the point that you say it.
I like this because of this thing about the wheel spin, the engagements that we're in on that we find out we should not have been. And that goes both ways as well, right? Yeah. We don't want to lead them down a path because it's going to help us make our quota. Yes, we want to make our quota. We do. But we want to make good quota, not just making the money, but making the relationship and making that long-term thing when it comes to the client's outcomes, right? Because if you want to have a client succeed and stick with you, that has to be kind of a mutual thing. Disengaging appropriately, respectfully, and even adding to it maybe some guidance for that client. Do you ever do that? I think that's important. Like, hey, I don't think we can really fit that the way you're describing it. We're kind of close, but I don't want you making too many exceptions here, because this is an important thing for your business, and we want to make sure you're putting your time in where you can solve it. Do you ever make recommendations to people that, hey, we're really not the right the right solution for you, we think you should talk to this company or that company, or do you not quite go that far?
I think we're fortunate in that with operating as Shire and PMAC, we tend to focus on different parts of the market. So we normally have good coverage. So sometimes we might say, well, you're not suitable for that product, but actually, so you might not be suitable for Shire, but PMAC you are. There will be the odd exception that falls through the cracks that is not suitable for either. And normally that's because the people that approach us, actually maybe their requirement is not true CMMS as we would see it. And if we don't think it's a good fit, then we'll say it's not a good fit. In fact, I'm not going to tell you the company because, but I had a meeting literally in the last couple of days with a huge organization, and they explained what their requirements were. And we said, that's not us. We could do some of that, but rather than try and fit it in and say, okay, let's accept there's some compromises. If you're confident that there are better types of solutions out there, then you should say so. Because you talked about it earlier. From our perspective, what we really want is a great relationship that means long-term revenue. But we only get that if we're actually offering and delivering value. What we don't want is to have customers that churn after 1 year, 18 months, 2 years, because we're not delivering on what we promised. So that's why it's a benefit to both sides to ensure that assessment is honest and accurate. But the follow-on to that, so we talked a lot about that kind of what's important through the process and why that's a vital part of it. But the follow-on to that is the kind of implementation side of it. So if you don't implement, so a lot of people swap suppliers because either they've chosen the wrong supplier, because they didn't go into the process knowledgeable enough about their own situation. But then the follow-on from that is often it's the implementation that fails. And it's the same thing, really. It's not really understanding the change management piece, and it's not really engaging the wider business, the same as the other part of it. It's if you've not gone into the rest of the business and said, this is what we're going to do, this is the impact it's going to have on you, and you've not prepared people for the change management, then that in itself. So those two things combined are often hand in hand. So people are coming to that process who haven't prepared well enough to go through the process of selecting the right vendor are often the same people that haven't prepared themselves for the change management piece at the implementation point either. So you've got basically a double failure. So when we go in a year, 2 years later, and you see why they're struggling, you can often trace it back to those 2 points at the start.
And that's typically fixable if they're so willing, but by then they might have ideas across the organization that this just didn't work, we're going to move away from this. I think that's an opportunity for people to say, whoa, we got it for a reason, let's really assess before we move on. And then another thing, this idea behind the deployment itself, I think when someone makes their selection, they enter in the agreement with you and they're about to move to that deployment phase, that's when you have to redouble those efforts. And I say, I don't know if I'm right, but I say a really good thing to put in place is a real schedule on how you're going to assess where you're at based on where you started, and reinforcing and revisiting all these concepts on a periodic basis so that people know, hey, we have this. Are you using it? Are you struggling? And that keeps it kind of top of mind, I guess. I don't know if I love that term, but the idea that we get these solutions, we do all this work, someone at a company like yours, they all put resources, get you on board, everybody's happy, and then that deployment just goes off the rails. What do you think about the idea of having multiple champions within an organization that's a client of yours, as opposed to typically they don't have anyone that really truly owns the CMMS or EAM? I'm just curious your thoughts and experience on that.
I think you've got to have multiple champions to make it successful long term. If you have a single champion, I think you mentioned it earlier, if for whatever reason that person leaves or is unavailable or moves within the organization or out of the organization, then you've got a huge problem, because the rest of the business becomes so reliant upon them that it has multiple negative consequences. One, if they leave, but two, what if you want them to leave? You can't, because they're holding you. They effectively got a ransom note permanently in their back pocket.
Yeah.
But also, you tend to find that they'll be associated with a specific team, and often that's what causes resentment between other teams, or means that the adoption in the other teams is not as strong. So I think whoever is impacted, and it's often multiple teams, whoever is impacted by the deployment of some kind of digital maintenance tool, whatever it is, there's got to be a champion in each one. And I would advocate for that in the actual process of selecting the vendor, because if you've got a single champion, if for some reason it's not working, whatever that may be, then that not only are they the hero if it works, but they're also the fall guy if it doesn't. So in order to make it work, you need that collective responsibility, and that's why that change management piece is so important. You're not going to do it by. You can have a project manager, right? You can give somebody responsibility for implementing it, but if you're not bringing all of the stakeholders or a representative from all of the stakeholder parts of the business with you, then you're going to have a problem. It's as simple as that, really.
By doing that, you're creating more risk. So the more people it's diversified across, and maybe internal corporate documentation of what we have, why we have it, when we made that decision, where we were going, when we made a change to, say, a workflow in our work order process, whether it's preventive maintenance or otherwise, those things need to be documented and managed instead of just stuffed on the G drive that everybody looks at once a year. Maybe you gotta keep it. This is really a critical part of the businesses that we're trying to help with these platforms.
Yeah.
Everybody's in business to make money, but to make that money, it should be everybody involved thriving, because the solution is right. The support is there to kind of back it up. I think that's another thing where organizations that get their CMMS, have a CMMS, they fall down on the regular training. And sometimes that's because maybe they have to pay for it, or maybe the company that's providing the solution doesn't do it as well as they used to. They're growing, they're getting big. These things can happen. I'm just keeping it real.
Yeah.
And they need some of their own internal resources for that. And it should be a regular thing, because if everybody's comfortable, they know why we're doing this. You got the teams kind of moving well. Maybe you have maintenance and operations that are a little bit more like, hey, I'm here because of you and for you. Hey, I'm here because of you and for you, right? And they're all moving in the same direction. You can really thrive with almost any platform, as long as it's not just a complete pile of rubble that doesn't work. I think one thing I want to get, because I want to switch you into what's called the fun question segment. I want to get your perspective right here, right now. We're still pretty early in 2026, right? It's February that we're recording this. Might not come out for a few weeks or so or whatever, but what are you seeing in the industry right now from where you sit that makes you really excited and, hopeful? And also, what are you seeing that is a concern, whether it's a long-standing concern or a new one?
That's a great question. I think what excites me is there was a period for many years where digital maintenance, as I phrase it, for a lot of people was seen as a necessary evil. So it was seen as, well, you've got to have one, right? And they would do the basics or the fundamentals of what it did, and they wouldn't do it very well, but it might meet audit or compliance requirements, and it was a box checking exercise. What I see in recent years, which I'm sure everybody else, would their feedback would be consistent, is there's much more of a genuine interest to understand what are the additional benefits we can derive from it. How can we extend it? How can we incorporate it into other areas of the business? How can we use the data that it produces to make meaningful change? Because that's what good CMMS systems should do, that's what good digital maintenance should do, is it should provide information that allows not just the maintenance team, but the board. They should be able to see that information and they should be able to trust that information, and they should be able to make meaningful decisions and meaningful change on the back of it. And I've got to say, in recent years, that there's always been people that have seen it that way, but the number of people that see it that way, it's been driven by lots of things. The constant AI conversation, the decrease in margins, all of those things are a factor. Increase in raw materials, all of those things drive it. But I definitely think there is more of a genuine interest to get some kind of meaningful outcome from the utilization of digital maintenance, rather than it be a box ticking exercise.
Yeah, and I mean, I hope that's a real thing that's trending, because that makes it really possible for those organizations to achieve that. If they're focusing on that more, they're going to have more intention behind understanding it. How can we do better? And that's all anybody really wants. I know for me, that's that kind of thing that I'm always loving about the providers and the clients of those providers that are all thriving, and it makes everything okay for everyone. And I think that's the way it's supposed to work. Everybody can succeed. What about what's worrying you? Like things that kind of haven't changed, or that have come up that you're like, whoa, this is kind of a problem. This is going to get in the way. What would that be?
Well, I think just talking to people in the industry, and this has been around for a while, so it isn't particularly insightful, but it's the conversation always ultimately comes around to skills shortage.
Skilled trades, lack of
technicians, engineers, whatever the case may be. And obviously the lack of that skill shortage in itself, that also drives up cost, because they become more expensive to employ because of supply and demand. And so all of the conversations that we have will be either about the increase in compliance or regulatory requirements and how they seem to consistently get more stringent and more strict. And they'll often talk to us about how they deal with that from a digital maintenance point of view. So that's a very common conversation. But in terms of what we experience in respect of what our customers and our prospects are finding difficult, it's that skill shortage. It comes up pretty much every single conversation we have, and that is worrying, because you think, ultimately, where is that going to lead?
Yeah, we're going to have pain. We're experiencing it now. It's probably going to get worse before it gets better, but there's some hope, because we hear a lot of people talking about it, and we hear a lot of younger people starting to shift back towards that interest in the skilled trades and the things related to all the things we want to see thrive anyway: manufacturing, facilities, production, all this, all that. So we got to keep talking about it. And I just like to get that kind of unique perspective from where you sit, whether it's the same or not, doesn't matter. I just wanted to hear it from you. It's time now for the fun question segment. So
there's a fun question segment.
First timers got to suffer through these 3 fun questions. You'll have to let me know if they're fun or not. So, are you ready?
Let's do it.
No wrong answers. Anything goes here. What is your favorite music?
House music.
All right. I like it. Second fun question. What is your favorite sport or hobby? And on sport, it doesn't have to be one that you play or played. It could be one you just like to cheer for.
My favorite sport, without question, would be rugby.
Nice.
I coach under 18s team, which is quite challenging but very rewarding. I have a season ticket at my local team, which is Sale Sharks in the English Premiership. I love the fact that it's both complicated and brutal.
I think I get what you're putting down there, man. That's a good one. All right. Here's the big one. No wrong answers. What is your philosophy, perspective? Is it even a thing when we talk about or think about this concept of work-life balance?
That is a good question. And it is a very big question. Look, I think the slightly longer answer is, I think your perception of work-life balance changes depending on where you are in your life. I also think that it's a generational thing. I think different generations seem to feel differently about it. I think the younger generation get that balance. They have that balance. They have a better balance. And I think they're probably right. But I don't think they'll ever convince people who are in the generations that are older than them. But look, in summary, I don't think you should do anything at the expense of the people that you love.
Oh, that's a mic drop right there, man. And this is the reason for this segment on the podcast that I've thought about taking out. And a lot of people said, no, leave it in there. We get a kick out of it. We learn something and it makes us think. And that's what we're doing here. You know, we're not selling products. We're promoting the idea that people are interested in the outcomes for our clients. People are interested in hearing about, and you're interested in sharing about what you think on work-life balance or your favorite sport or anything like that. And that's what we're really trying to do here. So
yeah,
with that, I want to remind everyone. So if you want to get in touch with Gary Jones, you can find him on LinkedIn. And just to remind you, it's Elecosoft incorporating PMAC and Shire system. Those are two different technology products that they offer that can offer different pathways towards your solutioning of your maintenance management needs, your asset management needs, etc. Yeah. And I just want to thank you for making this time.
To be even more precise, it's Elecosoft or Eleco Asset Management. So there's different divisions in the business. But yeah, if anybody wants to have a conversation with somebody who will be really honest with them, I'm your guy.
Yeah. And if you do, let me know how it goes, folks. Gary, thanks for being here on CMMS Radio.
Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Greg.
You got it. Did you find this episode helpful? Please send us some feedback, suggest a topic, or ask a question. Reach out to CMMS Radio if you need a co-pilot on your CMMS project. Visit CMMSradio.com and use the What's on Your Mind link. Thank you for tuning in to CMMS Radio, your resource for all things CMMS, from selection to implementation, to help you make better choices, learn from industry experts, and have a successful CMMS journey.